My name's Agree, and I am one of the co-founders of Flowglad. Flowglad is backed by YC. It's a payments layer that handles the entire job to be done. Not just moving the money, but telling you in real time what features your customers can access. That includes usage credits, seat-based billing, wallets, you name it. The story with us and YC is just kind of funny, but we originally got into YC as an on-demand Kenyan grocery delivery service. We were cold calling the Central Bank of Kenya, trying to get regulators to talk to us. And we were granted one of the first ever letters of no objection by the Central Bank of Kenya. You think as an entrepreneur, there's like so much stuff that where you're like, oh, it's just going to work like this, right? It's going to be like the way it's simple, right? And it just turns out that there's all this complexity under the hood.
In this episode, I'm sitting with Agree Ahmed, co-founder of Flowglad, a YC-backed startup all the way in New York. And they're trying to rethink the payment layer from the ground up to make payments easier for companies to manage. We talk about why the payments are still lagging behind the rest of the developer stack, and how a bunch of seemingly unrelated experiences from past startups to time spent in Kenya ended up shaping how they build Flowglad today. And since I'm currently in Iraq, you also notice that the electricity dropped at some point.
Give me like 2 seconds so the electricity comes back.
Yeah, no worries.
It's insane.
I lived it.
Anyways, before we get into it, if you enjoy these kinds of conversation and would like me to continue making them, subscribe to the channel. It genuinely helps me more than you think. All right, let's get to it and have a fika with a startup.
So let's raise our cups for Startup Fika, right?
Fika.
Yeah, thank you so much, Agree, for joining me on this episode of Startup Fika. So let's start off.
Thanks
Tell
for
me
having
about
me.
yourself. Yeah, of course. So tell me about yourself, who you are, what you've done. Yeah.
My name's Agree, and I am one of the co-founders of Flowglad. And we are building a world where anyone who builds software that they want to sell online will never have to worry about the glue code that goes into making their payments layer work. It's a payments layer that handles the entire job to be done. Not just moving the money, but telling you in real time what features your customers can access based off of the plan that they're on. That includes usage credits, seat-based billing, wallets, you name it, right? So that's what we're building. Yeah, I mean, we're surprised basically that if you look at sort of the last 15 years of how developer tools have evolved, every single layer of the stack has been transformed multiple times in that span and had multiple generations of improvements and iteration. And the one layer that hasn't really seen much of any change is payments. And so we're tackling that slowest, laggiest layer and actually trying to bring it forward to 2026.
So you've gotten a lot of hype around that, right? So would you tell me more about how that journey has been?
Yeah. So Flowglad is backed by YC, and we have been really fortunate through that to be able to, talk to a lot of founders and see in that community to see that they're like running into a lot of the same issues. And we launched on Hacker News. We did a show HN back in November that ended up being, I think, like one of the most successful HNs of 2025. So kind of like overnight, our GitHub stars tripled. Started getting outreach from like the founders of dev tool companies. So like a lot of just like very, very strong inbound interest, because I think that like everyone who's been building in the space has known that this has been a problem for a while. And the things have not necessarily come together in terms of like the team and honestly like the conditions to actually bring momentum to try to solve it. So yeah, it's been very surprising how strong the reaction has been.
How much of a strategic move was that to try like get yourselves out there? Or did you just stumble upon it?
Yeah, I mean, it's like tricky because when you're building like a dev tool, your code and the product has to be so hardened and so stable and so performant that other people's code can run on top of your code, especially for a product like this. So we kind of like spent about a year building in silence and just reaching out to our founder friends, to try, the integration and see what gaps they could uncover. Spent a year sort of stabilizing the feature set and getting the type signatures and just like everything really, really like good, right? And then we started sort of sharing it more publicly. And yeah, like that, I think that if we had done it the other way around, it actually would have been a lot harder.
Like, wait, is like you just like fake it till you make it, but you made it, then you kind of.
Yeah, yeah. Well, because it's like it's payments, right? So it's both really, really hard to build something that is production grade, and it's also then a dev tool. So it's really, really hard to build something that's production grade there as well. So it's like it has to be something that's really stable, really fast. You're very confident in all of the sort of like types and interfaces that you're going to expose, because other people's code and their types are going to depend on your types. And then on the flip side, it's like those are all concerns that you'll have as like a developer tool. And then on the flip side, it's like with payments, there's just so many different states that things can be in. And for us, it's like we're not just moving the money, we're giving you a way of modeling also entitlements. So it was like a really, really, really heavy lift to get like even the first version out.
How was it like getting that first customer? Like, because you said you just reached out to some co-founders. Would you say that you relied a lot on relationships, or was it more like, okay, we saw a problem, let's solve it?
Definitely we saw a problem, let's solve it, for sure. But then it's like, okay, I have this solution. Who wants to try it, right? And yeah, for us, like the first customers were people who we knew. Thankfully, we knew a lot of founders. The tricky thing, right, I think with a product like this is that you have to kind of catch them at the right time. So like that ended up being like one of the things that was really important for us of like knowing so many founders, was that not all of the founders were ready to integrate payments like the moment that we sort of were like, hey, we've got like this payments layer for you to try to add to your app. But there were a few people when we were ready who gave it a shot, and then we got a lot of great feedback, and we just kind of kept going from there. And it's kind of like I heard this saying once that like you never stop clapping. Like once you have your first clap, it's just actually like the pace is different. And I think that this is definitely true for customer feedback as well. We've never really stopped getting customer feedback. It's just there's been phases where we're really trying to get in front of a large number of customers, and then other phases where we're still gathering that feedback, but we're spending more of our time focusing on fixing and addressing the improvements that they've identified.
How did the clapping kind of increase the pace of your company when you got into the Y Combinator?
Yeah. Well, so I mean, the story with us and YC is just kind of funny, because it's like we originally got into YC as an on-demand Kenyan grocery delivery service right before the pandemic touched down. Yeah, and so we realized very quickly that that business was not going to hit escape velocity in the way that we wanted to. And so we doubled down on building something that we were more certain was going to work, which is essentially matching startups with designers on subscription. Designers that, we sourced from like all over the world. The reason for that is that my co-founder Harrison went to RISD. So he had this like phenomenal design sensibility. It's still to this day very rare to find a designer of Harrison's caliber, let alone a founder of Harrison's caliber. So to like have that in one person, obviously like founders loved talking to this like design oracle. We basically like built that for a few years, and as it started to reach its like sort of stable state, we were looking and we're like, wow, I mean, we've now been co-founders together for like 7 years. This was like I think in 2024, we sort of realized, we've been co-founders together for 7 years. We're ready for sort of what's next. One thing that we realized that all of our previous businesses had in common was that they were transaction volume businesses that had a complex cross-border flow of funds. Very weird, right? Very, very strange thing for these like two software guys to sort of keep coming back to this class of problem. And so through that, I think that we had developed a lot of intuitions and seen a lot of problems related to, flow of funds and like sort of like, compliance questions and things like this. And so we were like, okay, what if we just like kind of cut straight to the chase? What if we just made this our full-time job? And that's kind of like how Flowglad was born. And we came into it, there's like still obviously so much that we've learned since we started, but we came into it already with like, I think, a fairly deep understanding of payments through that experience.
So kind of like your past experience paved the way for Flowglad, right?
Yeah. Even in like weird ways you wouldn't expect. Like, we've been getting like customer feedback, for example, that a lot of customers really love the idea that Flowglad will manage like entitlement state, like what features their customers can access. They love it so much that they're adding Flowglad into every single API request that they get from their front end. So we're like on the hot path. Imagine it's like we're a dev tool that literally is like as mission critical for a lot of our customers as their host or hosting provider is. Way more mission critical than a normal payment processor, right? And as a result, a lot of like the savvy technical customers are like, look, I want to be able to host my Flowglad state on my database so I don't have to worry about your latency or your uptime. Of course, of course you would want to do that. That's like so obvious, right? And this is where it gets weird, is that I remember like in when we were in Kenya, you know, for that first year, like we were in Kenya for a few years, and like that first year, we were working a lot with wholesalers. Okay, like wholesalers that sort of, you know, they import stuff from other manufacturers abroad or whatever, and then they like sort of like store it in their warehouse. You know, for a while it was pharmaceutical companies we were working with, and then later it was like food wholesalers. And one thing I noticed was that you'd go to these places and they had like, you know, like warehouses, like straight up like, you know, shelves, the metal shelves and the whole sort of like the whole 9 yards. And every single one of them though, even though it was like a little bit of an old school operation, they all had a room that had like the sort of blinking server rack in it. And I remember I'd like walk by and be like, what is that? And they would always be like, oh, that's our ERP. And I was like, what? You don't have your ERP in the cloud? And I now understand this is where that paradigm came from, right? Is that like literally it's so mission critical that they cannot afford to have downtime. And it's funny because it's like, okay, there's this thing that just was like this dot that you could never connect in hindsight. But it's like when we encounter a merchant who's like, oh my gosh, I love this idea of you guys managing my source of truth. I want to be able to have that in my database. I'm like, oh, I've seen this problem before, which is kind of crazy, right? Yeah. So like it's definitely lots of past experiences have paved the way for the stuff that we're building now.
Yeah. I was curious to hear more about the Kenya store. How did you go from New York to Kenya? What brought you guys over there?
Yeah. So we went from San Francisco to Kenya. So my co-founder Harrison and I met in October, I think it was October or August of 2016. And we immediately hit it off. It was clear that we were going to be friends and probably build something together. And when the time came that it was like, okay, you know, it's probably time for us to actually start poking around at what that thing would be that we were going to build, I started sharing this thesis with him about the emerging markets and how some of the most interesting sort of opportunities to like just build really like impactful, fascinating foundational infrastructure were in places that normally were overlooked by tech. And so I had spent a semester, actually, I took a semester off from college to go work as a mobile engineer at a startup in Nairobi. And immediately when I touched down, I was just like hit in the face with how much it felt like potential was being unlocked thanks to M-Pesa, this like payment network that they have there, this payment system. And I kept my eye on that space ever since. And I started realizing that there were like companies that were getting founded by teams in the United States in San Francisco. And they were figuring out a new business model. Almost always it was in Nairobi that they would start because M-Pesa literally like made the city years ahead of similar cities in other parts of the world. They would figure out a model in Nairobi and then go raise money from US VCs and then start the process of sort of like replicating that model in other markets. I was like, look, if they're doing it, why not us? And next scene, we literally like, okay, basically like next scene was that, how do I like, it's just such a bizarre, it's like such a bizarre turn of events. I don't even know how to like articulate it, but it's like basically like next scene is that we realize that we want to do this. We decide that we want to like have this be a fintech. And, you know, at the time we knew that there was sort of like a bunch of regulatory frameworks coming out in Kenya around like regulating fintech that like previously hadn't been there before. And so I was like 24 at the time. Harrison was 25. While we still had our day jobs in San Francisco, we were cold calling the Central Bank of Kenya, trying to get regulators to talk to us. And I still know that the Kenyan Central Bank opens at 10 p.m. Pacific time, because that's like when we would call. We'd like load up our Skype balances and make the long distance call. While I was still 24 and Harrison 25, we had our day job still, and we were granted one of the first ever letters of no objection by the Central Bank of Kenya. So like at this really early age, we found ourselves in this like unstructured negotiation with like an African central bank, right? And when we came out the other side of it with like the sort of the certificate of approval, we were like, okay, we did a hard thing in a place where it's hard to do a lot of stuff. It gave us basically conviction to give notice at our jobs. And book one-way plane tickets to Nairobi. Yeah. And then sort of, we went from there.
That must have been like an amazing feeling, right? And I have a feeling that also what kind of made Flowglad what it is today, right? Having that kind of ambition from the get-go, going to Kenya all of a sudden, cold calling a bank.
Yeah. Yeah,
Love it.
exactly. I think like, yeah.
What kind of mistakes do you feel like you have to kind of go through to achieve the kind of success?
I don't think there's really a shortcut besides just getting reps in. If you're not getting reps in, you're not going to go anywhere, right? So I think that it's almost like, what mistakes do you not have to make? I feel like you probably need to just assume that you're going to make every single mistake in the book that is just sort of like almost, you're like this unpolished rock and you're getting tumbled. And so the more frequently you're making contact with reality, the more you're going to sort of shine into your sort of like more final dazzling form. And I don't think it's like you should just sort of embrace or celebrate failure. Like, I think the whole point of this is that you want to succeed in the things that you're trying, but it should be normal. It's like a normal part of the process, right? It's like if you're succeeding 100% of the time, it's probably because you're like not aiming high enough. And I think that's similarly true for mistakes. Like, it's almost like it's very hard to list all the mistakes that you probably need to make, or the sort of like struggles you need to go through. But they are many. They're maybe numberless.
Amazing. I'll just give me like 2 seconds so the electricity comes back.
Yeah, no worries.
It's insane.
I lived it. Like, it's absolutely absurd.
We need a startup to fix this problem here too, man.
That's the real ambitious startup is figure out how to get Iraqi electricity to be stable. Oh my God.
That's a mission impossible right there.
I know. It's like they talk about the number of nines of uptime. I feel like Iraqi electricity has 1 9 of uptime. It's like it works 9% of the time.
Exactly. All right. Now let's kind of go back into Flowglad. Without going too deeply into the technicality of it, what did you notice about the underlying technology that made you think things could be done differently? Was that the Nairobi trip?
I mean, yeah, and it wasn't the Nairobi trip that it was like, oh, this could be done differently. It was more like when we came back to the United States, and I was just noticing that like it was so brittle and clunky. It was so brittle and clunky, like sort of managing all of the state that you have to manage to sort of like get your payments layer working. And then it started to become clear also that like tax compliance was becoming a thing. And so I remember like we got these like scary emails saying, oh, you've like hit a tax threshold, so you're going to have to register in this geography. And I'd be like, we had one transaction there, and now we have to like register and get a tax filing number and file taxes in I don't know, like the UAE, because we had one transaction, like, and we're gonna have to do this filing every quarter, even if we have zero. So it's like, it's funny. It's just basically like, you think as an entrepreneur, there's like so much stuff that where you're like, oh, it's just going to work like this, right? It's going to be like the way it's simple, right? And it just turns out that there's all this complexity under the hood that that you'll get exposed to. And what we want to do is just make it so that the payments layer, it works the way you thought it was gonna.
It's almost like maybe founders coming into the space have already the idea of how Flowglad should be working, and then realizing it doesn't really exist. And then you guys like, we should just bring it in.
Yeah. The number of times that, people have been like, wait, like, my payment processor doesn't do that. I'm like, no, they don't do that. Like, they're like, or like, the payment processor that everybody uses, like they don't handle your features for you, or like you still have to write a bunch of like code to like basically keep your systems in sync with theirs. And we're like, yeah, you do. And I think that, it's like there's been very little, I think, innovation in this space for a really long time because people thought it was a solved problem. I think that just the complexity has now made it so that it's noticeable. I would say that it's like noticeable that when you're vibe coding, like every other layer of the stack is just like you can deploy and ship and make changes and all this stuff with full confidence. And it's still like the payments layer is like, if you want to change that or you want to maintain it, it's harder to test. It's more brittle. It's harder to like actually harden and like make sure that it's like it's stable and like works the way that you want it to. And we don't think it has to be. There's no like rules that say that it has to be this bad, right? And we know because the product has made it so much better for our customers.
Yeah, I mean, from what I'm hearing, is like it's a pretty smooth sailing with at least how to handle objections and all that. And that kind of got me curious. What's the biggest objections that you guys have to work with when reaching out to founders and companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it basically just boils down to something that we will get with time, right? The biggest objections have always been they boil down to you guys are early, which is like a great problem to have because it's like, okay, so you're telling us that if we just keep marching in the direction that we've been marching, along the axis of time, we're going to be good, right? And like, there's every objection that we hear is a subset of you're early. Payments is mission critical and you guys got started recently. That recently is like slowly like we're seasoning into a more mature platform, right? Another thing is like, oh, you don't have this permutation of billing that I need. Maybe you don't have wallets or you don't have usage-based billing or you don't have like this configuration for usage or you don't have seat-based billing. We're knocking down that checklist one at a time, right? I want it to be really low latency. And, for us, we can either decide we're going to get really good at high performance throughput systems, more than just like really good, like extraordinary or world class from the very beginning at it, or we can get good at helping people sort of like manage the data in their database, which is going to give them more trust anyway. So those are kind of like the most common objections, but they all, again, are just variations of you guys are early.
Yeah. I mean, sounds like you're on the right track to tick everything off. And with time, I'm sure you guys are going to be one of the unicorns. I'm going to be looking back and I was like, yep, I had them on my Fika one day.
That's the hope, man. Yeah. I mean, that's every founder's hope.
Yeah. But all right, I agree. I think I've asked all the questions that I want to have answers to, but I think there's one more that I'm kind of curious to hear. If you could go back onto Agree's young shoulders when he was younger and tell him the advice that you know, or tell him the knowledge that you know now, what kind of advice would you give him?
Lean into the joy of building. I think that this is like something that I've noticed is that basically just if an idea really like captures your fascination and you really, really want to see it come live in the world, just leaning into that is so powerful. Because if you do that and you sort of, just pursue your curiosity wholeheartedly, everything just kind of has a habit of working itself out. That, and then honestly, like, I've been lucky, I would say, on this front, but never underestimate how important it is to treat people well. Yeah, I think that ultimately, like, our life is not just made up of how things go for us, but also how things go for the people around us. And we have a really big impact on that. And I think that, if you treat people well, you will be in a very warm and toasty environment and you will get a good night's sleep every night knowing that. I mean, like you were talking about even like the quality of this like camera setup that we have. I didn't set up the camera. I didn't set up like we've got like a whole, but we just like we've been very fortunate to have people around us who take good care of us, and we try to take good care of them too. I think it can be very easy to forget that when you're caught up in chasing your own goals and your own accomplishments.
Yeah, help others and they'll help you.
Yeah, exactly. And it feels good, honestly. Even like helping others feels good. Like sometimes it's like even if they don't help you, it can still be worth it to help others.
All right, I agree. Thank you so much for joining this episode of Startup Fika. Is there anything you would like to add to finish off this episode?
I think you covered it. Yeah, I'm excited for this to come out, and thank you so much for having me on.
Of course, it was my pleasure. All right, guys. Thank you for joining Startup Fika. Let's lift up the mugs.
Okay, let's
see
do
you guys
it.
in the next one.
All right, take care.